Praise Yah, praise Yah, praise Yah. This is part 5, History of the Hebrew People. Yom Rovi, Hebraic Scripture Study. You're studying the history of our ancestors. And we have moved from the introduction to our forefather Abram. We have looked at the life of Yitzhak. And now we have moved on to our new topic, the life of the patriarch Yaakov. Now, because of Yaakov's position in all of this, we have to we actually do have to ensure that he spends sufficient time on him, because he lays the foundation of moving from one person under the covenant, Abram, to another individual under the covenant, Yitzhak, and he will be the patriarch from where expansion begins, because the covenant is now upon him, and his descendants, more than one, will each bear the covenant, the mark of the covenant. So this is the foundation of the community. And tonight we're going to also look a bit at geography, the location of his travels, the location that our ancestors actually inhabited. That's Abram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Abram, from the time he left and traveled down into the land of Canaan, we will see that that land itself is very much Northeast Africa. And the ancient history of this time placed this land between two Hamitic nations, the descendants of Ham, or Ham. And that would be Babylon or Assyria at that time, because that civilization that began with Sumer after the flood continued to be built on, with name changes, but caring for the same culture with some additions to it. But that was a Hamitic or Hamitic civilization. Nimrod founded that in Sumer, that civilization. And Nimrod's uncle, Mitzrayim, was in Egypt. And then, of course, Canaan itself was the brother of Mitzrayim, the cursed brother of Mitzrayim, the one who received the curse instead of Ham. And that curse particular was to Canaan himself and not to the others. They are the descendants of Ham. But our focus and concentration is not necessarily on Ham, but on Shem. So we continue now with that backdrop, geographical backdrop. And remember, the reason why we can truly say that this area is Northeast Africa, and I want to bring that home, that it's Northeast Africa, because governments for decades have been trying to isolate the area of Israel, the land, the geographical landmass, try to separate it from Africa. Historically, that is incorrect. Therefore, prior to coming into this study, we looked at the language and found that Hebrew itself came out of a form of cuneiform that gave us the pictographic Hebrew, which then became the Paleo-Hebrew, in which the scriptures was written. So here we go. Now, this is ancient Canaan. The borders at the south, Beersheba, That's basically bordering Mitzrayim, Egypt. And to the north, it would be bordering Syria and also modern day Iraq and the places in that vicinity. So we see that here our ancestors, even before they took the land, occupied a land or sojourned in a land that was heavily populated by Africans. And this is why, this is another thing I want to highlight by bringing out the point that the land of Israel is situated in African territory. It's because a lot of the culture and the interplay that we will see as we study is related to both. So they were surrounded by Africans to the north and to the south. And yes, I said to the north because a lot of times what is considered as West Asia or Western Asia is Northeast Africa. As a matter of fact, and sorry for the sidebar here, Africa or the rule of Africa extended all the way to India, on the east coast of Africa, heavy interchange between India, the peninsula of Saudi Arabia, and the eastern Africa. But our focus again is on Canaan. So here it is. And this is a rough approximate map of the lands inhabited by Israelites or under direct central royal administration during the United Monarchy. And that is under Shaul, David, and also Shlomo. That was the period of the United Monarchy. This is basically what is referred to by the recurring biblical phrase from Dan to Beersheba. You know that Dan is in the north and Beersheba is in the south. The central core of ancient Judea. This area was part of and I don't want to use the word Jewish because it plays into a global deception that has blinded the eyes of so many. So the part of the Hebrew kingdom or Israelite kingdom or Israelite province within a larger empire, almost continuously from the days of King David down to 135 Common Era. And 135 Common Era marks the historical time that Emperor Hadrian from Rome expelled our ancestors, changed the names of Jerusalem and the land of Judea to Palestine. And that's where it was from that period then the word Palestine would have come into vocabulary for the land of Israel. Now, to our forefather Yaakov, 20 years of voluntary exile. And I call it voluntary exile because last week we looked at what Yaakov did to Esau and the anger that Esau was embroiled in, plotting to take away Jacob's life once his father died. And we saw also how Rivka, in her wisdom, got Yitzhak to do what she wanted, but are actually asking Yitzhak to do it. And that is what you call a wise woman. Okay? And some might call it cunning, some might call it deceptive. But if she is wise enough to get somebody to do something without making it look like a command or a demand, she has wifely wisdom. Okay? Now, Yitzhak told Yaakov this according to our records in the book of Bereshit, Genesis chapter 28, verses 2 through 4. He says, "Arise, go to Padanaram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife for yourself from there, from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. And El Shaddai barak you, and make you bear fruit and increase you, and you shall become an assembly of peoples, and give you the barakah of Abram to you and your seed with you, so that you inherit the land of your sojournings, which Elohim gave to Abram. So you can see here, not only is Yisha sending Yaakov away, but he is confirming the covenant given to Abram that was placed upon that's Yitzhak, on him, sorry, Yitzhak. He is placing it now on Yaakov. It could be that he probably thinks that he won't live to see Yaakov return, but whatever it is, he's making sure that that covenant is passed on even prior to. So Rebekah did this to save her son's life. She would have been grieving for two sons at the same time, grieving for Yaakov and grieving for what Esau did to Yaakov. Both are children. But in order to save his own life, Yaakov listened and he went into voluntary exile to get away from Esau. Now, at this time, Yaakov, Yitzhak, is in Beersheba, southern Israel, just above Mitzrayim, Egypt, or the Negev, the dry land between Egypt and Israel. So he's moving from Beersheba, and he's going to head northeast. He's moving up through all of these, and you'd see Bethel is marked there in red, and that is because we're going to look at something that's exciting that happened at Bethel or Bethel. So that's an idea of where Yaakov is and where he'll be moving from. Now, on his way, as you saw, he leaves from Beersheba and he heads to Bethel. So at Bethel, this is what he experienced. Resting at Bethel, traveling from Beersheba, Yaakov stops at Luz to rest on his way to Padanaram, to Laban, his uncle. And he is shown a ladder from earth to heaven, with Yahweh seated on his throne, with messengers ascending and descending. Now, this would seem that a portal was opened, to say, where that allowed the messengers of Yahweh to move from the high heavens to the presence of Yahweh, following his instructions and directions, to come to earth to do his bidding. And the place where this portal or spiritual gate was in the land that was formerly called Luz. But we're going to see that our father changed the name because of this experience, in seeing that he recognized what he was seeing and who he was seeing. And he knew from tradition. So you can see also that the tradition of, if you see the face of Yahweh, you will die. Because he said that he saw the face and lived, but he didn't really see the face, but the very appearance of Yahweh is sufficient. And that's good thinking, because when sin comes near to Yahweh, sin is totally consumed and eradicated, and we are sinful creatures on the road to perfection. So it would be good to always be in awe and in fear at the presence of the Most High. Now, this is very interesting, because Yitzhak turned over the covenant and the blessing upon Yaakov before he left. But at Bethel, after being shown that vision by Yahweh of the portal or the ladder going up into the heavens, we find now that Yahweh is speaking to him In that vision, Bereshit of Genesis 28:13 through 14 reads, and see, Yahweh stood before it and said, I am Yahweh Elohim of Abram, your father, and the Elohim of Yitzhak. The land on which you are lying, I give it to you and your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall break forth to the west and to the east, to the north and the south, and all the clans, of the earth shall be Baruch in you and in your seed. Here it is. The one who established the covenant with Abram is confirming the covenant in the second generation of Abram. And after receiving those words, Yaakov follows Abram's example. Bereshit 28:20 through 21. And Yaakov made a vow saying, seeing Elohim is with me and has kept me in this way that I am going, and has given me bread to eat and a garment to put on. When I have returned to my father's house in peace, and Yahweh shall be my Elohim, then this stone which I have placed as a standing column shall be Elohim's house. And all that you give me, I shall certainly give a tenth to you. Now, this custom is long before the Torah at Sinai. And the event of giving a tenth was long before Yaakov. However, as the book of Hebrews says that Yaakov and his descendant Louis returned tithe to Melchizedek, which Abram gave, saying that Louis and Yaakov were in Abram's loins when he performed that act. So they, being a collective of Abram, participated in that act. So it's not surprising that Abram, who taught his children the ways of Yahweh, would have his children doing the same thing that he did, and voluntarily, as an act of worship. And what I would like to highlight about our father Yaakov here is listen to what he says. Yahweh told him that he's with him. Yaakov vows saying, see, Elohim is with me. Confirmation that Yah is with him. And has kept me in this way that I'm going. Now, he hasn't gone yet, but he's already using the past tense and has kept me in this way that I am going. That means he is seeing the end at the beginning. He doesn't stop there. He said, and has given me bread to eat and a garment to put on, even before he got bread to eat and before he got a garment to put on. So what Yaakov is giving us is an example of stepping out in faith, believing that what was promised already is, and walking in it. Then he says, when I have returned to my father's house in peace, already saying that he's going to, not if, but when it'll happen. When I have returned to my father's house in peace, that means that I'm going to be cool, shalom, all over. And Yahweh shall be my Elohim. Notice that. We normally said Yahweh Elohim of our fathers, the Elohim of Abram, the Elohim of Yitzhak, the Elohim of Yaakov. But so far, Yah has been the Elohim of Abram. He's been the Elohim of Yitzhak. But now, a personal relationship has developed. And he says, now Yahweh is my Elohim. And to confirm this, I will put this stone as a standing column, and this shall be Beit El, house of Elohim, or house of El. and all that you give me, not what I earn, not what I got, all that you give me, I shall certainly give a tenth to you. And this is a big lesson for us in the example of our father Yaakov. He gave back to Yah what Yah gave to him. In other words, saying, all that I have is yours. Thank you for allowing me to enjoy what you have given me and see, to show you that what you have given me does not rule me or cause my eyes to be turned away from you. I gladly give a portion to your service and to whatever you want it for as an offering to you. And he chose 1/10 just like Abram. Not surprising. It's Abram's grandson. Now, he journeys now. We've already moved from Beersheba, and you can see Beersheba in the south. Okay, trying to get some cursor action going. This is Beersheba down here in the south. Okay, and he's traveling northeast, and he's up, moving up. He would have moved to Damascus and Hamath, and Ibla, Aleppo, and he's coming to Padanaram right here. And that's where his uncle Laban lives. So that's his journey. Now, Jacob arrives to his destination. The book of Yasha gives an extended account of the journey of Jacob from Beersheba to Padanaram. The book of Yasha is such a wonderful book to read because it consistently puts in everything that is missing. I have hardly found any inconsistency between the accounts in Bereshit and Sefer Yasher. But we're going with our script from the Hallelujah Scriptures, and I gave the account as is recorded there. But let me share something from the Book of Yasha. When he set out, Yasha mentions that Esau sent his oldest son Eliphaz with a group of servants to actually assassinate Yaakov while he was on the journey. But the boy, still being a teenager, even though he had seasoned men around him, but he was in charge because his father made him in charge of taking care of the deed. After hearing the words that Yaakov spoke to him, he changed his mind and he just took all of the jewelry and everything else that Yaakov had with him and left him poor. So he really was traveling with nothing, according to Yasha. You would see also that having passed through numerous experiences on his way, Jacob arrives in Padanaram, and his initial encounter was at a well with men familiar with Laban. But let's look at, he is at a well. Eliezer was at a well. No. At that time they were acknowledging Laban, that they knew Laban, and that was his area. At the time that they were doing that, Laban's younger daughter arrives with her father's sheep. Now, we cannot say this is coincidence because we are worshiping an Elohim who is very intentional and who always in his wisdom causes what he wants to happen to further what he has planned for restoration. So Laban's younger daughter arrives with the sheep, and like Eliezer, Abram's servant, found Rebekah, so also Jacob finds his love at the well. Something about the well. And as we continue to go through the history of our ancestors, we can see that the well played a very important role in matching up. Now, 14 years, 4 wives. Jacob at this time is around 40, okay? Just to give you an idea of how old he is, he's around 40. Both his young cousins, both Leah and Rachel, that we will learn about here, these are teenagers, okay? Just to give you an idea. And some people might say, well, they're marrying those little children, they're so young. But in this culture, 13 and 14-year-olds knew more how to keep a house than a lot of the 30 and 40-year-olds of the 21st century. They were trained and they were ready, and they knew that as women and wives, they had a responsibility, and they learned that very early, just like the young boys. The young boys engaged in manly things and training at very early ages, even though when they married, they were very mature at the same time. Now, Jacob, having been welcomed in his uncle's house, was hired by Laban to care for sheep. Jacob negotiated 7 years of labor as payment for keeping sheep, labor for Rachel in marriage. Now, after 7 years of labor, blissful labor, says that the time flew by as if it was yesterday. Laban deceived the deceiver. We know our father Jacob at this point had done some major deception. But here we have his uncle deceiving him and gave him Leah, the older daughter, instead of Rachel. Displeased with what had occurred, Jacob protested and was guaranteed marriage to Rachel immediately after the 7-day honeymoon with Leah. He would have to work another 7 years to cover Rachel after he married. He didn't have to wait another 7 years. He got her right after the 7 days with Leah. He was able to marry Rachel, but he had to work 7 years for that marriage again. So in total, his intention was to work 7 years for Rachel, but he had to actually work 14 years for her. Now, during the 7 years, while after his marriage to Leah and Rachel, because it happened, basically, it could have been in the same month or the month following, depending on what time of the month it was that he got married. During the 7 years, both Leah and Rachel would provide Jacob with their respective servants that their father had given them, Zilpah being Leah's maid and Bilhah being Rachel's maid. Both of them would give their maids as wives to Jacob, their husband, to competitively increase offering, excuse me, increase offspring. Now, this too, 21st century women might not understand this, but a woman in this culture in that time, and it still is so, and those in the Eastern culture that still hold on to it, that is not being affected by modernization or 21st century feminism, they saw their highest duty as bringing forth the fruit of the womb. These were women who wanted to have children to please their husband, because the husband with a lot of children was as wealthy as a person with silver and gold. And a son was even more valuable. So to ensure that the competition went well, both of them gave their handmaids, especially since Rachel would have taken longer to give birth for Jacob than Leah. Leah started right off, and she started trumping, and she got I think about 5 out quickly before giving up a handmaid, whereas Rachel had to get in quick with her handmaid so that she can say that she has offspring for Jacob. That was the high value that women placed upon themselves and the gift of the womb that Yah has given them. And they would have not been like many today. I don't even put a label on them pro-abortionists because abortion would not come into their minds, so they would not have been a pro. They would have been obedient women following the nature, the natural calling that Yah called them to. Here we go. Now, in 7 years of marriage, Yaakov had 12 children with 4 wives. Leah would give him Reuben, Shimon, Louis, Yehuda, Issachar, Zebulun, and the one daughter, Dinah. Rachel would have given him Yosef. And you notice I have a comma there and some lines. That's because she also gave Benjamin. But at this time, within the 7 years, Benjamin has not been born as yet. Now, the first handmaiden to give birth was Rachel's handmaiden, and she gave birth to Dan and Naphtali. Zilpah, the handmaiden of Leah, would give Gad and Asher. So we have 11 of the sons of Yaakov so far that he acquired within the 7 years. And then, of course, Dinah, the only girl. So he had 12 children altogether. Now, exponential increase, very important. Yaakov, after 14 years in self-imposed exile, longed to return to his father's house with his newly acquired family. Laban, realizing the reason for his prosperity was about to leave him, negotiated again for a labor extension. This time, the negotiated payment was sheep and goat based on their markings and color. Laban, being more skilled at deception than his nephew, son-in-law, changed these arrangements 10 times in 6 years. Yep, 10 times in 6 years. And 10 is very important because 10 marks the end of trials, the culmination of trials and testing. So you could say that this were tests for Yaakov to get the deceiver out of him, or to begin to uproot the spirit of deception that was in him. Now, even though Laban did this to Yaakov, and Yaakov was actually receiving retribution for his own acts, you see that when retribution was in full, Yahweh still did exactly what he said he would do for Yaakov. True to his word, Yahweh gave Yaakov wisdom to counteract Laban in his deception and thus cause exponential increase. So much so that, as we're going to see, that after working 20 years in Aram, Yaakov thought to secretly return to Beersheba with his family and possessions without informing Laban. Yaakov originally left Beersheba with nothing. Remember, Yasha even said that Eliphaz robbed him, so he definitely had nothing. But is now returning with 4 wives, 12 children, thousands of sheep, goats, camels, and an entourage of hired servants. And when I say thousands of sheep, goats, camels, I'm talking about thousands of each one of those categories, and no exaggeration. We will see when we go into part 6 that the gifts that he sent to Esau was no small possession, and he had so much more. And yes, he even had hired servants because he had increased. He had blessed him. Now, Laban, upon learning that what had happened, pursued Yaakov, especially since his household idol had also disappeared with Yaakov was leaving. But Yahweh warned Laban in a dream not to speak good or evil to Yaakov. Not finding the idol, because Rael, having stolen it, sat on it during the search, Laban made a covenant of peace with Yaakov. And this would mark Yaakov's official release from Laban and the land of Padanaram to return to Beersheba, where his father and mother were still longing to see him, even though the journey back had larger obstacles standing between him and the return. This is part 4, and we haven't reached that, but that's a beautiful image that we will see next week, God's willing. So at this time, I want to invite discussion on what we have just studied. Any comments or questions for discussion concerning that? Interesting story, hey.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Yes, this is very interesting. And was this the same account where when that wasn't artifacts when Rahel kept it? What was his idols?
Yes, it was his idol. He was an idolater. Laban was.
Okay. It almost seemed as though this had occurred another time, an instance, but I'm sure this is the same account.
Yes. She hid it in her camel saddle bag.
And when
Laban, yes. That's
okay.
yes. That's it. It's the same thing.
Okay. But I find that was very interesting about this whole scenario and having to have that was Laban.
Yes.
Who ended up working the 7 years.
That was Jacob working for Laban for 7 years.
Jacob, yes. And I thought it was kind of a sinister thing for him to do, but then I realized in the end, what he gained more from it in the end, as if to say he got double for his trouble. And I always find this very interesting. So
he did get, I think he got more than double for his trouble.
Yes. He was let me see the word I used. He was tricked when he was supposedly getting Leah first, Rahel, but they made sure he got Leah first because the oldest had to be married off before the youngest. Is that how it go?
Yeah. That could possibly be culture, right? But Laban is very tricky. Laban probably wanted both of his daughters married off to Yaakov. And because Leah was not the first choice, he said, well, you want the younger one, you can take the older one too.
And question on that. Was there something medically wrong with Leah?
Oh,
her eyes were something
They said that the scripture is written, it says, and Leah's eyes were weak, but that doesn't it doesn't really imply a physical sickness. It seems to be it could be she was not as beautiful to look at as Rahel.
Okay.
Because her having weak eyes, you would think that maybe she could barely see, but we don't have that any mention of that going forward. Only the fact that Jacob's heart was given to Rahel from the time he saw the well.
Okay. Well, I just
that's just my gathering from it. Somebody else might have a different say on that, but with what we've been given concerning Leah's weak eyes. It most likely is only speculation.
Okay. Well, praise, yeah, I thought it was very interesting, and it's always strike my curiosity when it came to this account. For some reason, it always stuck with me. But I praise, yeah, that I'm getting more insight on it. Praise, yeah.
And that's the purpose of the history of people, because I see a short Hepzibah. Once we become attached to our historical past, our present becomes more founded, and our history and our faith are intertwined. So we're studying our history with our faith both at the same time, so we don't have a disconnect. Short Hepzibah.
Yes. So just clarifying something Ali had just said, and that you were speaking to. So you're saying it was cultural at the time that the older get married, or you're not sure?
It in Eastern culture, the precedent is on the older siblings, that they should do things first because it's in that order. Now,
So, okay. So so Jacob would have known that?
even if Jacob had known that, even though, as we have seen in the past, that even though the culture and the tradition is that the firstborn or the elder should be the receptor of whatever the primary benefit is. We've seen where Jacob was chosen of Esau and Yitzchak over Ishmael. And the fact that when Jacob negotiated with Laban, Laban agreed to it. That means that Laban would have given, even if the tradition was so, Laban would have given the impression that he is going to bypass tradition and allow Jacob to marry Rechab, because it would have been in his power to do it. But Laban, because Laban as a deceiver, even if it was custom, he agreed to the terms with a bad intent. Because he could have said at the beginning of the negotiation, well, nephew, it doesn't go like that here. The older have to get married, rather than wait until after 7 years and then trick him.
So in Laban's eyes, Laban was being deceitful and cunning, I guess, in his eyes, because he deceived. He was a deceiver. I mean, what I'm saying is, in his own eyes, he must be saying, I'm pulling a fast one on him.
That's exactly what he concluded that he would do, and he did.
That's exactly what he did, because he led the party, invited people over, get some drinks, and so he cunningly devised this plot and plan to deceive, of course. And that's what he carried out. And then he's like, yeah, I still can give you the daughter. I still can give her to you. Yeah, just all you have to do is do another 7 years. It was the height of course, manipulation and cunning and deceitfulness, but I just want to know that he knew he would, I mean, because it's the culture at the time, I'm saying he would have known that too. It just hit me that it was the culture. He might have known that. He might have been aware, and I guess just thinking it through. That's all.
Yeah. Like I said, it would have been the cultural tradition, but it doesn't mean that you have to go according to the cultural tradition. Abram broke the tradition. Yitzhak broke the tradition when they chose the second born over the firstborn. So Laban could have done the same thing. And Jacob could have thought that that's what Laban was doing. The book of Yasha says that that Laban on the wedding night after the 7 years, the wedding night with Leah, so, so that wedding feast, when everybody was drunk, said Laban put out all the lights. And when Jacob asked him why he put out the lights, he said, it's their custom to put out the lights on the wedding night. And that was to make sure that Jacob didn't see who he was honeymooning with.
But you know, I do understand. I understand what you're saying, because just hearing you said that even though something might have been the custom, that does not mean it was so much so fixed.
And
it was not. It was like even though it was custom that it could have been, but there are also circumstances where, because it did. Just hearing you say that reminded me of Abraham and Sarah. It was, man could have had more wives, but when he was with Sarah, even though her womb was not open, it's like he respected her enough that he didn't do it until she gave her handmaiden to him. But it's like after she passed, it's like, because that means after she passed, then he remarried and of course continued on. But it's like, just because it was the culture, that does not mean to say he could have done it, but he did not.
yes,
the same thing is with this, like you pointed out, there's numerous instances where that, even though it was custom for the oldest to get, that does not mean it was like a hard, fast rule that it had to have been that way.
yes, 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 yes. So, okay, the whole thing is very interesting, and one of the things that that I want us as I would like to encourage us as Israelites to recognize that when Abram left the Chaldean, he didn't leave with a loaded bank account. He left, and in his obedience, Yahweh enriched him. Through circumstances, he became enriched, just like, and Yitzhak benefited from what Abram had. And Yaakov, when he left with nothing. But he worked for 20 years, dedicated to what he was doing, and Yahweh blessed him. Yahweh, our Elohim, was not changed. And we are all laboring now, and as far as I am aware, we're all entrepreneurs. And that is hereditary from our ancestors. Let's not be afraid to do as they did. Yahweh is now our Elohim. He was the Elohim of Abram, the Elohim of Yitzhak, and the Elohim of Yaakov. He's now our Elohim, and he has not changed. What he did for them, he will do also, and he is doing also for us. So with that, I would encourage you to continue the entrepreneurial pursuits. The labor will not be in vain. Yah is preparing right now to do supernatural things for exponential expansion, and not so that we can live luxuriously, but to be prepared for what's ahead. So always look back at them as role models as we are pursuing. And the same way they brought everything to Yahweh, bring everything to Yahweh, let him bless it, let him multiply it, and let him increase. So I do pray also that as we continue in the history of our people, because we have a long way to go, we're traveling now, we are in the the 17th century BCE, before Common Era, and we have to come all the way to the 21st century Common Era to show where Israel is now and what Israel must do to actually embrace the covenant that Yah has given to us. So, are there any more comments or discussion? Questions? Yes, shalom, shalom, Aki.
Shalom, shalom again. Okay. Yes, maybe just a comment. I think, Kohen, I really agree with the first thing that you said, that Laban was very tricky and a bit deliberate, because Laban wasn't a poor man. And then also, I think we might be neglecting some things, that it may have also been knowledge to Laban that Jacob did receive the blessing of the firstborn, and that he usurped that from Esau.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, that's something that I've always thought about. He wasn't poor either, so I'm pretty sure Leah would have had many suitors, many proposals, and he deliberately would have neglected them, because, as you said, that was his plan and intention. Because when you read not just scripture, but like a lot of texts, and you look at documentaries on these times, you would know that these things were things that were so important that they were given priority almost over everything else: marriage, birth, and death. So from the time women reach that age, from about 12 or 13 years on, even before that time, they would have already had suitors, or even known whom that they
Yes.
were going to get married to. So this was something that was very deliberate, and not just so, but when you read the book of Yasha, something I believe I remember from it concerning what Jacob left Laban's house with. I think Jacob still didn't fully get deliverance from that deceptive ways that he had until he had that wrestle, because it also said that the animals that he took was those that were grizzled and bay, but the animals that he would have gained from Laban was those that were more or less genetically superior.
Mm-hmm.
So when he left Laban, he actually left him with animals that wouldn't have had that. So these are some things that I would also like to actually point out, that he did get double for his trouble, but he still had some ways that he would have had to get over. And
Right.
we saw that, well, later on, and you see that he had that wrestle before he met with Esau.
Yes.
He got touched, of course, and he ended up having that limp. Something else notice, Milan, you cannot do that. You know better. Something else that I noticed was that, I don't know if you mentioned it, but I can't remember hearing it clearly. The stone that Jacob rested his head on was one of the altar stones from an altar that Abraham built. Is that correct?
Okay. I've never, if I have read it, it most likely would either been in the Book of Yasha or the Book of Jubilees, but I cannot say for sure. You mentioning it, I want to say that, yeah, I remember reading it, but because I cannot remember which book it would have come out, but I know I heard something like it before.
Okay. I just wanted to ask that because I remember, I can't remember if it was from reading it or if it was from a study, that was something that was highlighted as well. And it also
Right.
highlighted the importance of altars, because Abraham built altars unto Yah,
Yes.
or if not everywhere that he actually went.
Every place he stopped, he built an altar.
Yes. And if that was the case, then we could also see that even the things that we do unto Yah, especially when we decide to devote our time to Him in prayer in study and in fasting, that altars are not just physical, but they also have
Yes.
implications to them. As you mentioned it, you said more or less like a portal, for example. But if that is the case, then every time we sacrifice something unto Yah, especially with the intention of it being unto Him that is spiritual, the same the the same applies, that that is an altar more or less that we are building unto Yah. And I remember some part in scripture that says, I can't remember which book, that I can't remember the exact words, but from my understanding, just to mention it, was basically that in the time to come that we wouldn't approach Yahweh by going up to just physical altars, more or less. I can't remember which book and the exact wording. You might better remember for me.
Yes. You're mentioning it, and I don't remember if it's I know it's in one of the books of the Nevi'im, whether it's Yeshayahu or Jeremiah. I know it's in one of the larger books, but you are very, very correct in all that you have said, especially about the altars. And that's something that we really need to reinforce the fact that we make altars to Yahweh, not only physical altars, but spiritual altars also. But it is necessary to make altars for worship, because we have to recognize too that our enemies make altars against us, altars that we need to break down. And once those are removed, we have to establish set apart altars to occupy that place, so that could never come from there again. So it's destroying evil altars and establishing righteous altars. One of the reasons why Abram made altars wherever he went was to establish the presence of Yahweh in his environment. So that's what we do when we create altars in our environment. We actually create, as you indicated, Shore, that it is a portal that connects us to Yahweh. And I think that those in the spirit world who are our enemies would acknowledge that, because they can see us operating on the spiritual altars in the spirit world, but they cannot come near.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
yes.
I also like the fact that that you pointed out that again, that Laban would have been well aware that Jacob would inherit from Yitzhak, and he would have definitely wanted his daughters to be connected, not just one but two. So he had his own intentions from the get-go, and he knew how to work it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to finish up, I was just saying this to say that even the things that we do right now for believers, they don't just stand for us, but they also stand for our generations after us.
Yes.
Because it's really based on the depth of intimacy, on the relationships that we have with Yah, in being obedient and consistent with serving these altars, that we've made sacrifices and devote our time, our resources, and basically devote back the things that He has blessed us with unto Him. This is where a lot of, as you say, breakthrough comes for not just us as individuals, but for generations, because
Yes.
it's on these covenants that we have with Yah personally that allow now to His presence, as we see. Those ministering spirits were coming directly from Yah's presence, basically bringing His presence to Jacob and allowing him to have that vision transcending from the physical realm into the spiritual realm. And you can see every time that happens, more or less, anytime anyone has an encounter with Yahweh, does bring deliverance, because His, of course, is what brings that deliverance. So this is why I believe that these altars are so important, not just for our forefathers that are in the scripture, but also for us and the things that we do and that we dedicate to Yahweh. It's so important for us to be consistent with them, because you never know the room that you probably pray in for the last 40 or 50 years, that your grandson might step into that room long after you're gone and decide to kneel down and pray because he's going through something. And based on that relationship and based on those covenants that you have had with Yah, that there's always this open portal there that would allow Yah's presence to come. And a mighty deliverance comes through that long after you probably even gone. So I just wanted to just make that comment as the praise Yah.
Yes. And to show the scriptural substantiation behind what you just said, Jacob was not born, so Levi was not born. But in the book of Hebrews, it says that Levi, while in the loins of Abram, returned tied to Melchizedek, showing that the actions of the previous generations had direct effect on even on the unborn bloodline in those generations. So yes, very much so. What we do in our relationship to Yahweh and the building of altars and our acts of worship does carry on in the bloodline. And at the same time, we know that there are other evil things that can come into the bloodline to contaminate it. And Yahaz is going through the process of eliminating those things in the bloodline and any other things that have caused contamination, so that when we set up our altars, we have direct contact. We have that open portal directly to him without the hindrance that comes along with the evil altars and their works of manipulation. So this is good that we're pulling this out of Jacob's life, because we have watched our ancestors, Abram, not much so Yitzhak. Yitzhak has been the calm patriarch. Not much excitement going on except when he lied to Abimelech about Rivka being his sister, and that would have been basically the only thing that Bereshit gives us concerning Yitzhak in that regards. But our father Abram, his life was eventful. Yaakov, very eventful. And we're still in the process of learning more about Yaakov, because he is the one that establishes the community. And he left Beersheba as a individual person, as an individual. He built a community in Padanaram and brought that community back to Beersheba. So next week, Yah's willing, we will pick up from there as Yaakov, our ancestor, returns to Beersheba, what he encounters and how he dealt with it. Yes, Shah Danzo.
Yes, I just have this one question as we're actually on this topic. And you might know, because I know that you're very well studied, especially when it comes to these scriptures that are not considered to be canon. But I remember about a year ago diving into like a very deep study onto the Book of Yasha, and more or less I would have almost completed it, and then I stopped almost getting to the end of it. And do you know what are the theological arguments for why that book is not included as canon?
Okay.
That I would have, because something I noticed, and you mentioned, it was all of the information I read there, none of it contradicted, from my remembrance, anything that I would have read in Genesis, except the things that were added, that were present in Genesis. Seems like it went into some detail that we didn't have, like even the accounts of when Hashatan tried to oppose Abraham when he was going with with
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
and these things. But from a theological standpoint, from your research and from your studies, what are the arguments as to why? Because I remember reading something about can't remember if like the most recent um copy of it was either too late or something like that. But you might better be able to tell me because this is a question that I've never heard anyone really answer clearly, and it's something that I've always been troubled about.
Okay. The canonization of the scriptures that we have today, the Tanakh, that would be the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketubim would have been canonized by the Pharisees. And there were certain beliefs of the Pharisees that the books of Yasha, Yubelis, Yobelim, Sefer Hanuk, because they spoke of uh, end time events, the Pharisees left them out. And even though the Pharisees had canonized what we call the Old Covenant, many people in the first century during the time of the Pharisees did not accept that canonization. They used these books as a part of Scripture, and it included more than 66. Praise Yahweh that the books that the Pharisees did cause to become canon, they had to be in control of it because they are all legitimate inspired books. But because of their own prejudices, they left out other books like Yasha and Yobelim and Hanuk and others, which the early assembly utilized and the Eastern assemblies utilized. Even in the King James, I think it's the 1511, 1611, something like that. It's said to have all of the books of the Apocrypha included in it. That would be the basic reason. It's based on who is canonizing. And in this case, the Pharisees, which was one of many of the sects of Hebraism at that time. Notice I don't say Judaism, because Judaism is the religion of the Pharisees, and not everybody followed the religion of the Pharisees. Hebraism came from the time of Moshe, and that is the Torah. So those who pursued the Hebraic way would have actually continued to use those books that the Pharisees excluded. When we come, I know you didn't ask about the New Testament, the Brit Hadash, but just for general information, it would have been the Roman Catholic Church of Canada. Books because they are consistent with each other, even though there are other books that are said to have been included, well, other writings that are not on the level of the writings of the emissaries of Adon Yahusha. For instance, you have the Shepherd of Hermas, which is a very a spiritual book that inspires, but we could not include it as canon. It was not included as canon. Hermas being the brother of one of the early leaders. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Clement that he was the brother of. But I don't want to be quoted as saying that. But it was one of the early leaders, his brother, who was a believer and had various experiences where a messenger would talk to him about virtue and righteousness, very similar to some of the stories in the books that was left out of the Tanakh canon. But when you're reading these books, you know, the Ruach HaKodesh, you can confirm everything because the Ruach HaKodesh actually impresses you about it, so that you are confirming canon as you go through it.
Definitely my experience with the Book of Yasha. That's why I wanted to ask. Now I remember we did have a discussion on this on another platform, and one of the brethren raised that part of the issue with Hanok and I think Yasha was that the most recent copies of them came, I think, later than the most recent copies of what we had to be the old, or I think the New Testament. So I think that was where the confusion came in for me, and I think that was of the argument.
Yeah. Let me answer that part, okay? Because that would make a very good argument about the reasons for canonization. However, the accounts in both the Book of Yasha and the Book of Hanuk goes back further than the documented copy that might be at hand. The Hanuk, I think the oldest copy was the Ethiopic copy that is from Ethiopia that that have actually it's the compilation of Sefer Hanuk Book 1, because there are two Hanuks. One seemed to be more authentic. Now, because you found a document in the 21st century that was dated in the 17th century, but that 7th century document was actually a part of an earlier document, say around the 1st century BCE. Because the 17th century document is the only document that is at hand, you cannot disqualify the authenticity of that document just because it was copied in the 17th century. And that is one of the problems that that most students have in understanding that these the Book of Yasha is mentioned in the book of Yehoshua and Shemuel, giving indication that Sefer Yasha was around from that time for these persons to have quoted it. The same thing with Hanuk in the Brit Hadash. Even Yehuda quotes Hanuk as being seventh from Adam. As a matter of fact, he gave a verbatim quotation from Sefer Hanuk. Even though there are some things that might appear confusing in Sefer Hanuk, it's trying to understand a book that is very old, that has items in it that might not be very familiar with it, that we might not be very familiar with. And we're trying to understand it from a modern perspective when it only made sense in the context and the time period in which it was written. So with that, it doesn't matter that the Book of Yasha might have been, you have a copy in late discovery. That doesn't disqualify it from going all the way back. I found the same thing with a book called the Kibber Nagas, Glory of the Kings, the Ethiopic account of the Pearl and Shlomo and Makita's meetup, the Queen of Sheba, and the birth of their first son, their son who went back to rule. And it gives an account now, even though the records are from the 14th century Common Era, the oldest copy, it has been given as an oral tradition from ancient times. And that's another thing. A lot of information, historical information, is given oral as a folk tradition, story time, and then is written down much later. And because it is written down much later, that doesn't mean that that's the origin of the beginning. So we have to consider that when we're looking at Yasher and Hanuk and those other books.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for also sharing that. Yes. Now that you actually explain that, it does bring some peace to my mind as well. And I like that you also pointed that out because yes, in the book of Jude, it also references Hanuk, which I found was very interesting because you don't see that almost anywhere else, but it shows that those who were with the master at the time, that
Mhm.
these teachings that they were very familiar with, and if it's actually mentioned there, because this is something that I found in prior discussions, but not debates, but discussions um, with other believers that more or less had this aversion to these books that they they couldn't really um, debunk it, or they couldn't really give a straight reason as to why it would be referenced. Um, they would make some suggestions, and these was like me, but perhaps and stuff like that, but nothing conclusive. And when you look at at how everything in the scriptures that we have precepts, um, every single word that is written, and even the references given to these scriptures, none of them contradict what anything in the world is saying from my personal experience. So
Yeah.
that's
And
right.
yeah, and also I didn't even mention the Qumran's community Dead Sea Scrolls that has copies of Sefer Hanok, and also the Wars of Yahweh, which is also mentioned in the book of Yehoshua, showing that these books existed, and the copies that were found were copies that were copied at that time, but obviously something predated those copies. And when you read the book of Kepha, when he talks about the angels that are chained in Tartarus, he got that background from Sefer Hanok also. That's where he got that information from, even though he didn't give a direct quotation from Hanok. You'd find that same information only in Hanok. So it was definitely in use. And again, the Ruach HaKodesh guides us as we study.
Yes, praise Yah.
And I have to do a little disclaimer, Deborah, that I don't want anybody at all to think that I believe I know everything, because I don't, and I'm just learning, and I want to continue to learn. But I do appreciate the compliment that you gave earlier. I see myself still as a student learning, and Yahweh had me read a whole lot of things from early childhood till now, a lot of things that people are just now reading. He had me read as a teenager. So a lot of things are not new and not surprising. And that's why I know that I hardly know anything, because there's so much more to know. And we rely on Yahweh to make sure that we get a correct understanding. So I do whatever he has given me the opportunity to examine and to read over the years. He's also blessed with recall, so that I can share it with others, like on this platform, or whenever I'm in conversation with someone, to encourage and to give instructions. But I would like to consider myself always as just learning and needing to learn a little bit more. So thanks, my beloved brother, and thank you both my sisters for being on tonight. And we look forward to next week. We're gonna have some wrestling matches. You're going to have some brothers reuniting, sibling rivalry going on up here next week. So let's look forward to it. Remember to invite somebody to it, especially if you know they're looking for their history to establish their faith, because our history and our faith are one and the same.